Good morning. I'm Sarah, survivor, author, speaker, clarity coach. I help women find the way to get safe, stable, and strong, especially after experiencing betrayal or trauma or forms. Right now, I'm inviting you to join me in my Jesus bubble. That's where I spend time with God, reading books, thinking through different promises, contemplating, praying, all of the things. Right now, I've been through the book Hinds on High Places. And spent 21 sessions together going through this book. This morning, the name of the chapter we're going to read is High Places. Much of left the valley of humiliation with her companions' suffering and sorrow. And she has traveled to the high places, made it all the way up to the mountains. And you know what I did? And so have her handmaid. She is now not much afraid of grace and glory, and her companions for travel, suffering and sorrow, joy and peace. So, next, right. Grace and glory, with her handmaidens, joy and peace, stayed up on the high places for several weeks while all three explored and learned many new lessons from the king. He led them himself to many places and explained to them as much as they were able to understand at that time. He also encouraged them to explore on their own, for there are always new and lovely discoveries to make up there on the high places. Even these high places were not the highest of all. Others towered above them into the sky, where mortal eye could no longer follow them, and where only those who have finished their pilgrim life on earth are able to go. Grace and Glory and her friends were on the lowest, the beginner's slopes of the kingdom of love, and these were the parts which they were to explore and enjoy at this time. From these slopes, too, they were able to look down on the valleys below, and from that new viewpoint gain an understanding of many things which had been puzzling and mysterious to them before. From beneath, they had not been seen clearly, and even then only a small part had been visible. The first thing, however, which they realized up there on the slopes of the kingdom of love was how much more there would be to see and learn and understand when the king took them higher on future occasions. The glorious view which they now enjoyed was but small in comparison to all that lay beyond, and would be visible only from yet higher places above. It was now perfectly evident that there must be ranges upon ranges which they had never dreamed while they were still down in the narrow valleys with their extraordinarily limited views. Sometimes, as she looked on the glorious panorama visible from these lowest slopes in the kingdom of love, she found herself blushing as she remembered some of the dogmatic statements which she and others had made in the depths of the valley about the high places and the ranges of truth. They had been able to see so little and were so unconscious of what lay beyond. Look at this beautiful watercolor. I love this illustrated version. If that had been the case, while down in the valley, how much more clearly she now realized that even up on those wonderful slopes, she was only looking out on a tiny corner of the whole. She never tired of looking from the glorious new viewpoint on the first slopes of the kingdom of love and seeing it all from a new perspective. What she could see and could take in almost intoxicated her with joy and thanksgiving, and sometimes even with inexpressible relief. Things which she had thought dark and terrible, and which had made her tremble as she looked up to the valley because they had seemed so alien to any part of the realm of love, were now seen to be but parts of a great and wonderful whole. They were so altered and modified that as she saw what they extended into, she wondered at having been so blind and stupid, at having had such false ideas about them. She began to understand quite clearly that truth cannot be understood from books alone, or by any written words, but only by personal growth and development in understanding. and that things written even in the book of books can be astonishingly misunderstood, while one still lives on the low levels of spiritual experience and on the wrong side of the grave on the mountains. She perceived that no one who finds herself up on the slopes of the kingdom of love can possibly dogmatize about what is seen there, because it is only then that she comprehends how small a part of the glorious whole she actually sees. All she can do is to gasp with wonder, awe, and thanksgiving, and to long with all her heart to go higher and to see and understand more. Paradoxical as it may seem, as she gazed out on the dazzling vistas, so glorious that she could not look at them steadily or grasp their magnificent sweep, she often thought that the prayer which best expressed her heart's desire was that of the blind man. Lord, that I might receive my sight. Help me to open myself to more light. Help me to fuller understanding. Another thing which gave her continual joy was their unbroken communion with the king. Wherever he went, she and peace and joy went too, springing behind him with a delight which at times was almost hilarious, for he was teaching and training them to use their hind feet. Grace and Glory quickly saw, however, that he always chose the way most carefully, and restrained his own amazing strength and power, taking only such spring and bounds as they could manage too. So graciously did he adapt himself to what was possible to their newly acquired capacity, that they scarcely recognized, in the exhilaration of leaping and skipping like hinds on the mountains, that had he really extended his powers, they would have been left behind completely. For Grace and Glory, who had been lame and limping all her life, the ecstasy of leaping about in this way and of bounding from rock to rock on the high places as easily as the mountain rose was so rapturous that she could hardly bear to cease from it, even for rest. The king seemed to find great delight in encouraging this, and led her on and on, taking longer and longer leaps until at last she would be quite breathless. Then, as they sat side by side on some new crag to which he had led her, while she rested, he would point out some of the vistas to be seen from the new viewpoint. On one of these occasions, after they had been up on the high places for several days, she flung herself down on the lichened and moss-covered crag to which he had led her, and, laughing and breathless, said, "Even Hinds' feet seem to need a rest now and then." "Grace and Glory," he answered, "do you think you understand now how I was able to make your feet like Hinds' feet and to set you on these high places?" She drew closer to him and looked earnestly in his face and asked, "How were you able to do this, my lord?" "Think back over the journey you have made," he replied, "and tell me what lessons you learned on the way." She was silent for a while as she reviewed the whole journey, which had seemed so terribly long, and in some places so cruelly difficult and even impossible. She thought of the altars which she had built along the way, of the time when she had stood with him at the trysting place in the valley, when he had called her to follow him to the height. She remembered the walk to the foot of the mountains, the first meeting with suffering and sorrow, and of learning to accept their help. She recalled the shock of what had seemed such a heartbreaking detour down into the desert, and of the things which she had seen there. Then their journey along the shores of loneliness, the empty cove which the sea had filled to the brim, and then the agony of disappointment and frustration experienced in the wilderness when the path once again had turned away from the high places. She remembered crossing, She remembered crossing the great seawall, walking through the woods and valleys until the rapturous moment when the path had turned back toward the mountain. Her thoughts turned to the precipice of injury, the forests of danger and tribulation, the great storm during which they had sheltered in the hut, and then the mist, the endless mist, and the awful moment when the path suddenly led down into the valley of loss, at the nightmare abyss of horror into which she had looked when she thought of turning back. She recalled the descent down into the valley of loss and the peace she had found there before reascending to the heights behind in the aerial chairs, and of the days spent in that place where she had been prepared for her burial, then that last agonizing ascent, and the cave where they had sheltered from the floods and where she had been tempted to cast away the promises, then the spring called Mara, and finally the mist-shrouded grave up among the peaks where she had lain on the altar. How little she had imagined, when she first set out on that strange journey, what lay ahead of her, and the things which she would be called upon to pass through. So, for a long time she sat silent, remembering, wondering and thankful. At last she put her hand in his and said softly, "My lord, I will tell you what I would." "Tell me," he answered gently. "First," said she, "I learned that I must accept with joy all that you allowed to happen to me on the way, and everything to which the path led me. That I was not to try to evade it, but to accept it, and lay my own will on the altar, and say, 'Behold me, I am yours, acceptance with joy.'" He nodded without speaking, and she went on. "Then I learned that I must bear what others were allowed to do against me, and to forgive without trace of bitterness, and say to you, 'Behold, I am yours, bearing with love, that I may receive power to bring good out of this evil.'" Again he nodded, and she smiled still more sweetly and happily. "The third thing I learned was that you never regarded me as I actually was, lame and weak and crooked and cowardly. You saw me as I would be when you had done what you promised and had brought me to the high places, where it could truly be said, 'There is none that walks with such a queenly ease, nor with such grace as she.' You always treated me with the same love and graciousness, as though I were a queen already, and not wretched little much afraid." Then she looked up into his face, and for a little time could say no more. But at last she added, "My lord, I cannot tell you how greatly I want to regard others in the same." A lovely smile broke out on his face at that, but he still said nothing, only nodded for the third time and waited for her to continue. "The fourth thing," she said with a radiant face, "was really the first I learned up here. Every circumstance in life, no matter how crooked and distorted and ugly it appears, if it is reacted to in love and forgiveness and obedience to your will, can be transformed. Therefore, I begin to think that you may have allowed us to be brought into contact with the evil things that you want changed. Perhaps that is the very reason why we are here in this world where sin and sorrow and suffering and evil abound, so that we may let you teach us so to react to them that out of them we can create lovely qualities to live forever. That is the only really satisfactory way of dealing with evil, not simply binding it so that it cannot work harm, but whenever possible, overcoming evil with good." At last he spoke. "You have learned well, Grace and Glory. Now I will add one thing more. It was these lessons which you learned which enabled me to change you from limping, crippled, much afraid, into Grace and Glory with the Hinds' feet. Now you are able to run, leaping on the mountains, and able to follow me where I go, so that we need never be parted again. So remember this, as long as you are willing to be acceptance with joy and bearing in love, you can never again become crippled, and you will be able to go wherever I lead you. You will be able to go down into the valley of the world to work with me there, for that is where evil and sorrow and ugly things are, which need to be overcome. Accept and bear and obey the law of love, and nothing will be able to cripple your hinds feet or to separate you from it. This is the secret of the high places, Grace and Glory. It is the lovely and perfect law of the whole universe. It is this that makes the radiant joy of the heavenly places." Then he rose to his feet and drew her up beside him and said, "Now use your hinds feet again, for I am going to lead you to another part of the mountain." Off he went, leaping on the mountains and skipping on the hills, with Grace and Glory following close behind, and the beautiful figures of Joy and Peace springing at her side. As they went, she sang this song: "Set me as a seal upon your heart, love more strong than death, that I may feel through every part your burning, fiery breath, and then, like wax held in the flame, may take the imprint of your name. Set me a seal upon your arm, your love that bursts the grave. Your coals of fire can never harm, but only purge and save. Jealous love, your burning flame, oh, burn out all unlike thy name. The floods can never drown thy love, nor weaken thy desire. The rains may deluge from above, but never quench your fire. Make soft my heart and your strong flame to take the imprint. Next time, we will read about Much Afraid or Grace and Glory's return to the valley. This part, sometimes, especially depending on where you are in your healing journey, can be a little harder to digest. The idea, are we to accept with joy and bear with love the cost of what others have done that may be done in the name of evil? And what exactly does that mean for us? Does that mean we do nothing? We never fight back? We never walk away? No. It's more about the spirit and the attitude and the posture we have inside of us. Not that we never fight against. Because remember, even Much Afraid has had a rock fight with self-pity and bitterness and pride. It's okay to refuse company with those who choose evil or indulge in evil traits. And yet, in our own hearts, we have to come to the realization that we are also responsible for how we respond to the harm that we have experienced. We are not responsible for the harm we have experienced, but we are responsible for how we handle it and what we do with it. And that is a journey. So if you're stumbling along in that journey, I certainly am not perfect and have not fully arrived on the other side, but I have walked on this path for a long time. And I would love to walk with you. If you would be interested in working together, you can check out the link below for group coaching sessions, and we can stumble along toward that end goal together. I'll see you tomorrow.